Max and Leo were in their treehouse. It was top secret time.
Okay, remember, Operation Giant Sub is a go.
Leo nodded. He was all in. Mr. Biggs, their neighbour, had made a giant sub for a party. Max and Leo wanted it, badly. The plan was foolproof. Sort of. Sneak into Mr. Biggs' house while he was gardening. Grab the sub, get out. Simple. Nighttime. Max peeked out the window. Coast clear! He crept downstairs, Leo right behind. They tiptoed past Mr. Biggs' car. Almost there.
Then crunch!
Max stepped on a twig. The car alarm blared to life. Max and Leo froze, hearts pounding.
Get out of here, raccoons!
Luckily, Mr. Biggs just yelled from his porch. He went back inside, grumbling. Inside the house, things were trickier. The kitchen door had a laser grid. The beams crisscrossed in a complex pattern, making it look like a scene straight out of a spy movie. The kids stared at it, wide-eyed and unsure of how to proceed. They knew one wrong move could set off an alarm or worse.
Don't worry, Leo had a plan. He always did. With a confident smile, he reassured his friends. We've got this, just follow my lead.
Leo whispered, pulling out a bag of flour from his backpack. He had seen this trick in a movie once. Carefully, he tossed the flour into the air. The fine particles floated down, revealing the intricate web of laser beams. Now they could see exactly where the lasers were and plan their moves accordingly. They dodged through, giggling. It was like a game of Twister, but with much higher stakes. They twisted and turned, ducked and jumped, making their way through the laser grid. But then a whirring sound made them jump. Mr. Biggs' robotic vacuum cleaner, it zoomed towards them, its sensors detecting the flour on the floor.
Goal! Max shouted, his voice filled with excitement. He had an idea. If they could just get the vacuum to chase the flour, they might be able to distract it long enough to escape.
Max grabbed a broom and used it like a hockey stick, whacking the vacuum away. It was a hilarious sight, like a scene from a slapstick comedy. The vacuum whirred and buzzed, trying to navigate the flour-covered floor while Max kept it at bay with his makeshift hockey stick.
Shh, Leo whispered urgently. They needed to be quiet now. The vacuum was distracted, but they still had to get past the laser grid and out of the kitchen without making any noise. They tiptoed carefully, hearts pounding, hoping their plan would work.
Finally, they saw it. The giant sub sitting on the counter was glorious. It was even bigger than they imagined. They grabbed the sub together. It was heavy. They stumbled back towards the door, their prize in hand. They burst out of the house, running as fast as their legs could carry them. They could almost taste victory. Back in his living room, Mr. Biggs heard the commotion. The noise was unmistakable. It was the sound of chaos, the kind that only a group of mischievous raccoons could create. He had just settled down with his favorite book, hoping for a quiet afternoon, but it seemed that peace was a luxury he couldn't afford today.
Those raccoons again. They were always up to no good, rummaging through his trash, stealing food, and causing all sorts of trouble. Mr. Biggs had tried everything to keep them away, but nothing seemed to work. They were clever, too clever for their own good.
He grumbled, grabbing his sandwich, the one he'd made for himself with extra care, and headed outside. It was a beautiful day, and he thought maybe some fresh air would help him clear his mind. The sandwich was a masterpiece, layered with fresh lettuce, juicy tomatoes, and a generous spread of mustard. He had been looking forward to enjoying it all morning. He didn't see Max and Leo racing away. The two raccoons were the ringleaders of the group, always the first to dive into trouble and the last to leave. They had a knack for disappearing just as Mr. Biggs arrived, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a very frustrated homeowner. He took a big bite of his sandwich, and then it happened. The taste was perfect, just as he had imagined, but as he savored the flavors, he felt something cold and slippery under his foot. He looked down, and his eyes widened in horror.
"Whoa!" he exclaimed, his voice echoing through the yard. He tried to regain his balance, but it was too late.
Mr. Biggs slipped on a giant puddle of mustard, his face contorted in surprise. The mustard had somehow ended up on the ground, forming a slick yellow hazard. He flailed his arms, trying to steady himself, but the mustard was too slippery. He dropped a huge glob of mustard on the ground. It must have fallen from his sandwich when he took that first bite. Now it was the cause of his impending fall. His feet flew out from under him, and he landed with a thud. The sandwich flew from his hand, landing a few feet away, completely ruined. Mr. Biggs lay on the ground, staring up at the sky, wondering how his day had gone so wrong so quickly. The raccoons, now safely hidden, watched the scene with amusement, their little faces peeking out from behind the bushes. It was just another day in the life of Mr. Biggs, and the raccoons were already planning their next adventure. Max and Leo, meanwhile, had made it back to their yard. They were panting heavily, their clothes covered in dirt and leaves. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the entire scene. They could almost taste the victory of their adventure. The yard, with its familiar sights and sounds, felt like a safe haven after their long day. They were almost home free. But then, disaster struck. Just as they were about to step onto the porch, a loud crack echoed through the yard. Max and Leo exchanged worried glances, their hearts racing. They had no idea what was about to happen, but they knew it couldn't be good.
Whoa! Max shouted, his eyes wide with shock. He watched in horror as Leo stumbled forward, his arms flailing wildly in an attempt to regain his balance.
Leo tripped over a tree root. It seemed to come out of nowhere, catching his foot and sending him sprawling to the ground. The world seemed to move in slow motion as Leo fell, his face a mask of surprise and fear. The giant sub flew through the air, landing with a splat. The sandwich, which had been their prized possession from the day's adventure, soared through the sky like a missile. Max could only watch helplessly as it arced gracefully before descending rapidly. Right in the middle of Mr. Big's prize-winning petunias, the flowers, which had been meticulously cared for, were now covered in mustard, lettuce, and slices of tomato. The once beautiful garden was now a chaotic mess of food and mud. The boys stared at the muddy mess. Their hearts sank as they realized the extent of the damage. The garden, which had been a source of pride for Mr. Biggs, was now a disaster zone. They could already imagine the look of disappointment on his face.
All that work, all that risk, and now this? Max said, his voice filled with frustration. They had spent the entire day on their adventure, only to have it end in disaster. It felt like all their efforts had been for nothing.
It was just sad. The boys stood there, feeling a mix of disappointment and regret. They knew they had to face the consequences of their actions, but for now all they could do was stare at the muddy mishap that had unfolded before them. Back in the treehouse, Max and Leo were covered in mud and defeat. Operation Giant Sub was a bust.
Well, that didn't go as planned.
You can say that again.
His stomach rumbled. He was starving. Just then, Max's mom called from the house.
Max, Leo, pizza's here.
Pizza? Suddenly, a giant sub didn't seem so appealing anymore, especially a muddy one. They raced inside, ready to forget all about their adventure. For now, at least. Later that night, full of pizza and feeling sleepy, Max turned to Leo.
You think we learned our lesson?
And with that, they both drifted off to sleep, dreaming of pepperoni and extra cheese. The Great Sandwich Heist was over.